And welcome on in to the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malman here with you, along with Zach Malman. Zach, what's going on? How are you?
Doing all right, Brett. Big Man City win today, so I'm doing all right. Good day.
Yeah, certainly works for some of us here in the Malman family. When United are going tomorrow, so excited to see that. And we got some brief news here today. Just looking at some of the NFL headlines that we had earlier in the day. Jeff Hafley, actually, the Boston College head coach, just named Green Bay's defensive coordinator. We were going to talk about the fact that Brandon Staley interviewed for that job, and the meaning of that. Obviously, that now comes to an end of his candidacy. We still have a lot of head coaches that are out there looking for some jobs, and not really very many left. It seems that the Washington Commanders right now are the only one out there. Bill Belichick's still out there. Mike Vrabel's still out there. Pete Carroll's still out there. A lot of big names. Some other news that trickled through the grapevine today. The New York Jets getting rid of Rex Hogan, their assistant general manager. And, it's an interesting time for the Jets. And, we'll them obviously next couple of weeks as we hit our free agency previews. But we're here today to talk about some of our sell high candidates in Dynasty, guys that might have tipped the scales of their value or had a really good year and, to get off the ship. You might be able to get some decent returns back. That'll be the topic for today before we start heading to our free agency previews leading up into March. Before all of that, though, please subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and give us the thumbs up. Start out right now down in Atlanta. Zach, Raheem Morris, he gets hired as the head coach there. And this came to a shock to a lot of people who were thinking that they were going to go after this huge coach, whether it was Belichick or Vrabel, et cetera. Having multiple interviews, even with Jim Harbaugh. Obviously, he then goes to Los Angeles, and the other two still are out there. What do you make of this news?
I mean, I think it's a big one there, Brett. Just because I think Atlanta, it was kind of a big thing to get a defensive-minded coach. I think they were kind of I feel like starting from like a culture change and trying to get like a hard-nosed mentality, similar to what the Lions did with Dan Campbell. You kind of get a defensive mind in there, and it built some character for this roster. They got a lot of young guys that got to learn a lot for the NFL. I think it's a good hire here. Obviously, Raheem Morris coming after being the defensive coordinator of Los Angeles and the Rams. I think it's a good spot now for Raheem Morris, and it's a good spot for Atlanta. Of course, we love to talk about this offense with all the young pieces that they're looking at. I think this can help them. I think it also help a guy like Bijan Robinson, maybe some hard-nosed football. I think that kind of thing, they can lean towards that in this offense. As of course, they got a young quarterback there in Desmond Ridder, who we don't know if he's going to be the quarterback. And maybe they draft somebody, maybe they don't. But I think it's a good hire for Atlanta. Definitely a really good guy to get in there for them.
Yeah, I believe it was Bijan Robinson who immediately tweeted out, praise God, let's get to work, or something like that. The guys seem to be excited about it. The Falcons, obviously, organizationally, they know him. He was there for 6 years, from 2015 to 2020 as a coordinator, got promoted after Dan Quinn was fired for the final 11 games of the year. He was interim head coach. And then, essentially they went in a different direction. And obviously we watched in the last couple of years how that direction went. It didn't really result in a positive. It resulted in a lot of high draft picks for this organization. And so, listen, I think that the defense, they were pretty good as far as the standards were. That's what sort of kept them in this year. their offense, yeah, they got a lot of young pieces, and we saw how Arthur Smith, and we'll talk about Arthur Smith in just a little bit because it seems that another organization took a flyer on him, but he couldn't get the offense going. And so that's the thing that I think for me, that was still the thing that stood out. I'm not sure that there was that offensive minded coach that would have been out there though. So it's a good hire. Listen, I'm not knocking the hire in any way, shape, or form. I think that, as far as the culture goes, obviously the guys are going to be fired up to go for this guy. And so I like the hire. I just think that they're going to still have to figure out a way to work in their offense because obviously it did not go so well. And their biggest question mark, I think, right now is who's going to play quarterback for them.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of questions to ask. So I think the big thing for Atlanta, though, is Morris obviously being there. You mentioned that. He knows this organization. He knows everything that he needs to know. Obviously, there's a lot of new players there that he's going to have to get used to. But it's only been 3-4 years since he was last there, Brett. So obviously a guy who's had experience as a head coach in the NFL hasn't been great, but I think some positivity heading into this role. I think he can definitely get a culture change from this locker room. Obviously, it wasn't the same, and they didn't get that spark under Arthur Smith, and they definitely need it now.
All right, jumping right to our next story, and it is about Arthur Smith. And listen, I feel for the Steeler fans who were screaming at multiple times this year about Matt Canada and to get rid of him and all that. And so they finally get rid of him and rejoice and all of that. And now you fast forward just a couple months, and they bring Arthur Smith, a guy who every single expert that is out there, every single insider, every single analyst is going, Arthur Smith, really? Because we saw what happened with the offense in Atlanta. And yes, the quarterback situation is a bit different, but it's not very much different. I don't know that Kenny Pickett has proven he's this first-round caliber quarterback that's going to lead them to a Super Bowl because, listen, he's had to defend. He had his defense is pretty good last year. They're one of the best defenses in the whole league. They kept him in a lot of games down the stretch, and obviously, like the Tomlin streak continued, and they were over 500 for yet another year, which that streak is still amazing to me. That one and the fact that the Yankees have gone over 500 every year since 1993, those two streaks are insane. But if there's one thing that you could point at, it's like, really? You picked Arthur Smith? Listen, he's a great guy. I've watched him do numerous interviews. He seems like a wonderful person. I don't know that this offense is like, yeah, we got Arthur Smith. Like, I don't know how excited I would be if he's coming into my system. And I just watched what he did out in Atlanta with those weapons. Like, they had so many weapons out in Atlanta. They don't have the same amount of weapons in Pittsburgh. You got Deontay and, Najee's kind of, iffy. He hits and misses each week, and we've seen Jaylen Warren sort of factor into that now. Like, I don't know how I feel about it. I was not excited, though, when I saw the name Arthur Smith as the offensive coordinator. And I feel for a lot of those Steeler fans out there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you here. Obviously, we've had our thoughts on Arthur Smith throughout this past season. I think the biggest thing for Pittsburgh is you go from a guy in Matt Canada where you really just couldn't get anything right on offense to a guy now in Arthur Smith where it's kind of a question mark. Some weeks it works, some weeks it doesn't. Oh, you look great. Oh, you don't look great. Like it's always a question mark kind of going into each game. And Pittsburgh, I give Pittsburgh credit. They do have some good talent on their offense. It's just a matter of kind of putting that to work. Of course, the two running backs with Harris and Warren, and then the wide receivers with Pickens and Deontay. They got a tight end who wasn't healthy, but when he is healthy is pretty solid, Pat Freiermuth. They also have the question at quarterback now, and I think it should end up being Pickett. I think they should end up giving him the job back, but that still remains to be seen. I think he's the best one of the group, clearly, though, and he's still young, has a ton of time. That's why they drafted him. But obviously, Atlanta, they don't have. Well, they did have a ton of talent there. I mean, 3 top 10 picks of talent, and Arthur Smith really couldn't make use of it. Like 26th in points per game, middle of the pack in total offense. The thing I'll say about Pittsburgh, they were bottom 10, worse than Atlanta in total offense, points per game, and passing yards per game. So, I mean, you can't get much worse than what Pittsburgh did. Maybe it's a little bit of an improvement, but with this offense, with the defense on the other side that does a lot of work for Pittsburgh each game and is a huge reason why they were pretty solid this year, and they made it a little deep there. Getting that opportunity, I'm looking at this offense and I'm saying, Arthur Smith, I don't know how much you're improving there. You might be middle of the pack rather than hopes of a top 10 offense.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the only positive I'll take out of the Arthur Smith thing is the way that the Steelers' offense is built as far as the weapons go. And you compare it to what he had out or down south, it's a bit similar in the fact of he does have 2 running backs that he can utilize. And he really leaned into those 2 guys in Algier and in Bijan, obviously. So there is a way with a not as strong quarterback that he might be able to make this work, especially obviously he's got Tomlin there who's going to obviously have a say in what's going on his offense, even though they're going to let Arthur Smith call the plays. Tomlin's still going to be there with him and telling him, hey, listen, this is what we want to do and here's how it's going to go. I don't think that it's just going to be a completely Arthur Smith controlled offense and free reign. So it is very similar. And they have a reliable tight end, and hopefully he decides he's going to use this one because he didn't really use Kyle Pitts. And he does have a pretty talented number 1 receiver. And he even has a talented number 2 receiver. And so, yes, it is a similar situation that works to the strengths of what made his offense click in Atlanta as far as the 2 running backs. I think that they're going to lean heavy into the running backs more than anything else this year in Pittsburgh. So it's not all doom and gloom in Pittsburgh.
Not wrong there. Yeah, I agree.
All right. So next news here, we have Ben Johnson. He is staying in Detroit. Zach, huge news for the entire Detroit Lions organization. This was the top coordinator candidate that was out there, it seemed, by every report, and he wanted to be interviewed by every single team, or every single team wanted to interview him. And he decides he's going to stay. And obviously, there were only a couple jobs left in Seattle and in Washington, and now the Seattle job is gone. But there were only 2 teams left when he informed those 2 teams that he is going to stay there for another year. What does this mean for the Detroit Lions?
I mean, this is awesome news. If you're Detroit, I mean, this can't be any better. Like, you keep the guy on offense that's been making this offense great. I think they might lose their defensive coordinator. We're still waiting to see on how that goes. But you keep your offense. Your offense was the best thing about you. Like, that's what made you so good. Number 3 offense in the NFL. Number 2 passing offense. I think the biggest thing here, Brett, Ben Johnson probably saw those 2 jobs and didn't see how he can really be successful in charge there, which kind of makes sense. I mean, 2 organizations that were maybe on the downhill slope for a little bit in this stretch right now. I think he maybe had a couple other jobs in mind that probably got filled. And he said, why risk it? He's 38 years old. He's so young. Like, why not stay on what's been making you really successful? And if you do it again, there's going to be more teams. It's going to be the next round of the coaching carousel, and some other teams are going to come after you. So I think it's a great move by him. I think the jobs that were available really wouldn't put him in a good spot. And I think working in this offense, he has all the talent in the world right now, Brett. And they were unbelievable this season. making it all the way to the NFC Championship. And a lot of that had to do with him and this offense. So great news for Detroit.
Yeah, huge news. I think that there's a couple different factors here. Number one is he's a 37-year-old guy. He's from the East Coast. I don't know that he would want to move to Seattle. He also might not have been the final candidate for Seattle. I think that it really just comes down to he didn't want to go to the Commanders, and he sort of wants to stay another year and potentially win a Super Bowl. I truly believe that the one job he was going to get was the Commanders job. They bring in a new general manager. Seems like a changing of the guard over there with the new ownership, obviously. And they want a fresh young face that's going to be there for a while. And they spoke about that at length when they talked about who they were looking for in a head coach, who they were looking for in a general manager. They wanted guys who were going to be there forever. And so, yeah, I don't know that Ben Johnson actually believed in the system and what he has there. I think that some better jobs could open up in the next couple of years. You know, we don't know the status of, let's say, Andy Reid. Like, we don't know what's going to happen with Andy Reid over the next couple of years. We don't know what's going to happen to Andy Reid in the next 5 weeks. Like, we don't. If they win next weekend, like, is it done? Is he over? Like, or is he coming back for another one? You don't know. So there's a lot of variables there, but obviously good news for Detroit. My favorite offense of this entire NFL season was the Detroit Lions. And the way that they meshed the run, the play action, and the pass all together, it was just like, let's pound it down your throat. We talked about this time and time again. They would run it down your throat with David Montgomery. Then they would say, okay, great, we're going to put Gibbs out there. They'd either fake a run to Gibbs and hit him in play action, or they would dump it right over the linebackers and hit Amon-Ra right over the middle. He was open every single time because they were expecting run. And so, you know, it sort of morphed as the season went on to Gibbs becoming one of those big options. And obviously he got more playing time as the season wore on also. But the offense was just so much fun to watch because you saw what they were trying to do. And it was tough to predict what play was coming because they were leaning into the run. And so when the pass came, like you didn't expect it. It made it very exciting. I'm excited that he's back for another year. And obviously his two running backs are going to be back too. And, you know, Laporta and the rest of those guys are there. And Jared Goff looks like a pretty solid quarterback now. Don't think we really thought about that, you know, heading into this year of what he ended up being. And so, yeah, it's another step forward, and I'm sure they're going to keep building and keep adding, and obviously the draft and so on and so forth. But, yeah, huge news in Detroit.
Yeah, definitely, Brett. I think they just have a very bright future with all that they have there. And, of course, Jared Goff, a career, like, resurgence here and all the way to the NFC Championship game. They're going to be fighting again next year for hopefully the same thing even more. Like, they are locked in right now. They're a really, really talented roster they have.
All right, so that's it for the news here. So, you know, not a lot right now, but obviously we're heading into what will be a very Taylor Swift heavy next 2 weeks, I'm sure, as far as whether or not she can get to the Super Bowl from her concert in Tokyo. Excited to see all the coverage to come about that. Let's jump into our off-season sell-high candidates, the 2024 off-season. Zach, it's a weird year because there were a lot of guys who flopped, just plain and simple. There were a lot of guys who flopped this year. And so some of the bigger names that were up there, and, you know, I don't like to bring up Tony Pollard's name too much in front of you because of your reaction to your first-round pick, but you know, that was a guy that a lot of people traded for at the deadline and sort of ended up costing them. Same thing with Austin Eckler. Like, these were guys who you sort of were buying high on, thinking that you were going to get their return on investment. These are guys that we think you should jump off the ship now before you even get to that point. Guys that we think in a year from now won't be worth what they're worth right this second. You know, as I always say, like, buy low and sell high. And so here we go. Let's start out with a guy who he's going to the Super Bowl and he's a winner. He's just proven each and every year that he can win. It's Patrick Mahomes. And listen, this is the top guy in fantasy right now. In my opinion, he's the number one guy in any format as far as Superflex goes. He's the top any position, I should say. He's 28, and so I think that's the first thing that I point to is he is 28 years old, and name value. His value is just so high. I actually went out and traded for him in the middle of this year. I believe it was week 4 or week 5, and I'm going to read out the trade right now just to give the viewers a look at what I gave up for him. I gave up Dak Prescott, Mike Williams, a first-round pick this year, a first-round pick next year, and a second-round pick this year. Now, we all know what happened with Dak Prescott, and he was a sell high probably coming into the season, not knowing what the season was going to bring. He ends up being a top 5 quarterback this year. That sort of burns me a little bit. Pat Mahomes does not have a great year. Still finishes in the top 10, and that was all well and good. But at the same time, I think we're starting to see that he is human. But at the same time, we've now seen in the playoffs, he's still going to get the job done as far as being an NFL quarterback and being the top NFL quarterback in the league. I think that as far as the panic, there's a lot of people out there that are panicking about Patrick Mahomes. So there is a chance that in some leagues, he's actually a buy low candidate. However, I think just based off of my personal opinion, I think I overpaid for him. I think that if I had gone another couple months without having the quarterback spot, I could have gotten him for way less than what I thought. That said, I think that he's still Patrick Mahomes, and his name value still carries very, very heavily as far as being the guy. And so I think that this is the time where you could probably get a ton for him. And if you're one of those people who's I want him to retire on my roster, I'm not going to fault you for that. I'm one of those people. I don't see myself trading him ever. I got him. I traded the boat for him, and he'll retire on my team. And that's okay. And I'm okay with that. As far as the other people, if you're hesitant about keeping him for the next 10 to 12 years of his career, if he even plays that long, now is the time, because I don't know that you're going to get the haul that I gave up to get him.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brett. I think the biggest thing that you got to look at is Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the league. Yeah, it's fairly not even close right now. Real football, 100%. In fantasy football, is he a really good quarterback? Yeah, he also is in fantasy football. Is he the top quarterback in fantasy football? He is not. And that's where he's being ranked right now, because the name, number one, he's so freaking good. Number two, he's been to Super Bowl after Super Bowl already in his career. But when it comes to fantasy football, the last 5 years, Brett, QB7, QB1, QB4, QB4, QB7. So, I mean, he's had 1 year where he was QB1. People are putting him at QB1 right now, and he's not there right now in fantasy football. In real life, I don't have an argument. He's number one. But I think the biggest thing right now with Mahomes is you got to take advantage of that value. It's weird right now, because obviously if you're a winning team and you're going for wins every single year, then yeah, you're not going to give up Patrick Mahomes because you're going to believe in him. Like my brother right here. I think the other thing there is if you're not in a winning position, why wouldn't you sell high right now? You're going to get an absolute haul because he's Patrick Mahomes. So yeah, this is the perfect time for it. He's going to his 4th Super Bowl, Brett, in 6 years. So I mean, the name value especially pushes him up really, really high, and I think that's just a little bit too high when it comes to Dynasty.
Yeah, I think that we've sort of started to see these 3 guys that are at the top, and you could say the same for Allen, and you could say the same for Jalen Hurts. Their values are just astronomical to the point where if you're trading for one of those guys, be prepared to give up some pretty significant pieces. And if you're on the other side and you are trading one of those guys, like you could probably fill out a pretty good team and get some pretty good pieces off of that trade that changes the whole face of your team. Whether it's picks, whether it's, really good players. I'm not talking about like prospects. These are, you're getting solid guys back for them if you're getting players, plus obviously very high picks. And so, yeah, while I throw Mahomes on this list, the same goes for Josh Allen. I mean, listen, I offered a similar package for Josh Allen at this point. And then watching the turnovers that he had over the last, 13 to 14 weeks of the season since I made that trade, like, yeah, I probably would have overpaid for him too. Like, and so you look at like where the quarterback value is right now in Dynasty, especially in Superflex, that upper echelon of quarterback, like we've seen the second tier start to creep in a little bit. Listen, it's great to always have the top guys, and I'm always going to advocate for that. But if you're, like you just said, if you're in a spot where your team is not a contender and you don't foresee yourself being one of those top 2 to 3 teams for the next couple of years, like, yeah, you can make a pretty good deal out of this and get rid of one of those top guys. Listen, the guy that I gave up was Dak Prescott. That ended up being his top quarterback for the whole year. And so it makes sense. And now, obviously, I'm giving up a lower first-round pick because my team did pretty well. But I gave up a future pick. Like, I don't know. My team could be awful next year. And now all of a sudden, like, there's a high first-round pick that I'm giving up. And that's the unknown. That's what you're acquiring when you're trading away one of those guys like Mahomes.
Yeah, and just quickly to finish this up, Brett, I think the biggest thing is people get worried when they are like, oh, well, I'm going to draft a new quarterback in the rookie draft. Oh, what if he doesn't pan out? There's some good rookie quarterbacks. I mean, CJ Stroud might be a top 4 quarterback heading into next year all of a sudden. So that could be the kind of trade and maybe a quarterback that you can grab in a rookie draft. It may pan out for you and could end up being a better fantasy quarterback, not real life quarterback, but a better fantasy quarterback than a guy like Patrick Mahomes.
And you mentioned CJ Stroud. It could even be CJ Stroud that you're getting back in that sort of a deal. If there's a team that wants to take the next step and they see Pat Mahomes as this guy who's going to turn them into a year after year contender, like, you're talking about solid pieces. And so, yeah, listen, Caleb Williams is going to be great. We'll talk about all those guys down the line, but yeah, we're talking about solid players that you can get back right now that have value right now. CJ Stroud's a perfect example, a guy who had an amazing year, still really, really young. Anthony Richardson, a guy who, yes, he got hurt, but really good young piece, like solid guys that you can get that are going to be good in one of those deals, I think is something that could change the face of your entire team.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Brett. I'll take us to my first.
I think it's a good transition.
Yeah, I think it's a good one here. My first sell high is a guy who lost this weekend, and it's Lamar Jackson. I think the biggest thing that I see with Lamar Jackson is the last time Lamar won MVP, it was 2019. And yes, there was different circumstances and everything that went on, but the 3 years since then, he did really not great when it came to fantasy. It was definitely a level below that top tier. Now he's MVP, going to be, I would think, MVP once again. I think the value right now is pretty high because why not? He's the MVP. But I think you need to kind of limit expectations just a little bit because there's some questions about Lamar, and I'm not going to get into too much of it because, yeah, there's some things in his game that people still question. He's a really, really good quarterback. There are some flaws there. So I think that kind of takes him a level below some of those top guys and could hurt him in terms of fantasy when it comes to some amounts of time. But I think the big thing is he had MVP one time, and his value was unbelievable. I think he was QB1 going into the next draft, Brett, the next year. And we saw 3 years where there was just not a lot there. And yes, he's got new weapons now and he's got a new offense, but I'm still a question mark on a guy like Lamar, and the value right now I think is just a little bit too high.
Yeah, he had 6 top 5 finishes, and 3 of those coming in his final 6 games that he played. Because remember, they did rest him that final week against Pittsburgh, and so listen, he also is a guy who I think carries a lot of name value. He's a running quarterback. He's been hurt before for being a running quarterback. I think that's another thing to point to. And we talk the age, like he's 27, and so he's not that old. The same way that we talk about Patrick Mahomes, like he's not that old. He's right around the 30 year arc. But where I do see him, not being Patrick Mahomes is I think he's going to fizzle out a little sooner because of the style of quarterback that he plays. He's a running quarterback. And so we've seen time and time again, those guys, like their legs start to go, they get knee injuries, ankle injuries, and the wear and tear of being an NFL player eventually will catch up with a Lamar Jackson. We haven't seen a quarterback go that deep into their career that has that style. And so, yeah, I agree with you. As far as it goes with Lamar, I have concerns from the injury standpoint, from the longevity standpoint, and him being MVP this year, I think actually will push his value even higher to where he's probably even that number 4 guy behind the big 3 of Allen and Hurts and Mahomes, and he's probably, listen, he's number 4, but he's pretty close to those top 3 guys who I think are right now neck and neck with each other based off of Mahomes having the year that he did. And so I just laid out what I gave up for Mahomes. I think that it's a similar package. It's probably not as high, but it's similar. You could probably, again, change the face of your team if you're giving up a guy like a Lamar Jackson, especially in a super flex format where you're obviously relying on 2 quarterbacks, and that's a guy who's night in and night out going to get you some pretty heavy points, especially on those games where he decides he's going to be the lead rusher.
Yeah, 100%, Brett.
All right, jumping right to my next guy here, and listen, I don't want anybody to think that I am undervaluing because we've now dropped 2 really huge names. Christian McCaffrey is going to be my name here. I'm not saying that that this is a guy that is going to just tank, because I still think that next year he's going to have a good year. I think that maybe the year after that he's going to have a good year. I think that obviously, listen, injuries have been a concern of Christian McCaffrey's entire career. That part is out there, and we know that. It's also pretty clear that the guys that are sitting behind him right now, Terry Davis-Price and Isaiah Mitchell and Jordan Mason, you have those 3 guys, like they're probably going to get rid of 1, if not 2 of those guys. So even less competition for him this year. I don't see them going out and getting a running back that's going to be any sort of competition to Christian McCaffrey as far as the workload. I just think that as far as it goes with PPR formats, you look at where everybody ranked and where everybody scored. McCaffrey outscored number 2, which is Travis Etienne, by 123 points in standard PPR leagues, which is nuts. I just think that the value was so astronomically high heading into this year because of the hype. And yet he, if you remember, was being pegged as the number 2 pick. Thankfully, I picked him at number 1 in our redraft league over Justin Jefferson. But like that's where he was. He was the number 1 or number 2 pick in every single league this year. And so I think it's going to be the same exact thing next year as far as the redraft format goes. And I think that sort of plays a role here as far as his value, because I just think that he's an elite guy that's going to be able to get elite pieces back.
Yeah, I mean, it's another one of those players that, yeah, like we're not saying, oh, the career's over, it's done, but like, can he get back to really the spot that he is right now? I think he could. I don't put some great chances on it because of, you mentioned the injury. So like the injury bug that he's had in the early parts of his career, hasn't had them recently, knock on wood, but I mean, it's always there. It's circling around. and he's 28. So we're not going to say the cliff is all of a sudden here. Now it's not there yet, and he's could end up being a guy who gets into his 30s and is still cooking along, one of those NFL greats, like in similar to that. But I feel like the value where it is right now, I mean, he's going to the Super Bowl, so like the everything about it right now is just like, oh wow, he's the guy in this offense, and they're moving along, and they're a really good offense. But I don't know if I think this could be near the peak left in Christian McCaffrey's career. I think this could be almost close to it. He's 28, so like I said, it's not at that area yet, but it's sort of an area to start thinking about what you can get for him, and you can get an absolute haul right now for a guy like Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and I'll just use an example of what we had going on in like our Dynasty League. So heading into last offseason, my team had just missed the playoffs. Now we're in a 12-team league, so I had missed the playoffs like 2 weeks left. Lost the last game of the year, ended up picking fourth, okay? If you're a team like that, and you just missed the playoffs, and you're at the fourth pick, and you can go out and get Christian McCaffrey, like, I think that that's something that those sort of teams would consider. Granted, now you take the third or fourth pick back for Christian McCaffrey. You're talking about a guy like in a super flex format, Marvin Harrison Jr. You're talking getting sort of talent at the draft, if not one of the quarterbacks. I think that is, to me, what separates trading away Christian McCaffrey from one of these other guys, because you're probably looking at an elite high pick and one of those talents and something like that. So when I say that, like, it changes how your organization is run, how your dynasty team, your dynasty team is run. You're talking about getting like one of those top quarterbacks or Marvin Harrison Jr. If it's a super flex format, I think that to me, if I'm looking at a guy over the next 5 years, I'd probably want Marvin Harrison Jr. just because, again, we go back to Christian McCaffrey, the injuries, the age, and when's the cliff coming, and the running back cliff, and all of those things, all of those question marks come up a ton. I would want that talent in Marvin Harrison Jr. I think it's to be a really exciting player.
Yeah, definitely agree with you, Brett. I'll bring us to my next one, and it's a running back also with some question marks right now. It's DeAndre Swift, who is now a free agent. Of course, looking at the market and going to see what some offers he gets. But I mean, right now it's an interesting one. I think he's clearly a sell high after the season he had. I mean, he was clearly the number one in Philly, but the question right now in Philadelphia is usually Philly's the kind of team that they only like to give like 1 year contracts and all right, we're going to move on to the next one. So that could happen again with a guy like DeAndre Swift. I don't think he's really too interested in that after the season he had. It kind of depends on where he's going. That could end up being worse than what he had. So I think it's a spot right now where you kind of just don't know what you're going to get. And he had a really solid year. Why not take advantage of a solid price that he has right now? He was, I mean, a lot of people's mind, they're like, oh, well, he's a number one, but he might not be a number one everywhere. We're in a league now, or looking at a league now where it's just two running back tandems. It's not always going to be just the one running back unless you're the top tier of them. And I think it's a good spot right now to sell high on a guy like Swift.
Yeah, listen, he's 24 years old, and I think the biggest thing right here is the unknown of how the next 6 months are going to play out. Listen, he played really well for them, and that's all well and good, but the way the running back market is, I think there's going to be a ton of guys that are out there, you know, the Saquon Barkleys, the Austin Ecklers, etc. Like, I think that they might go out and try to go big game hunting because it seems like that's what Howie wants to do in Philadelphia, and he's been doing it the last couple of years of going after some of those bigger name guys and looking like a genius. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if one of those big name running backs ends up on the Eagles next year. And so therefore, it's sort of unknown. Where does Swift end up? We don't know. I don't know that it will help his value, though, if he goes to certain spots. And there are certain spots that might actually tank his value if he ends up going into a committee. Like, we don't know. And so I'm not sure. And then there's the other side of it, which is he has had some injury concerns in the last 2 years. And so I'm not sure how much organization is going to go after him to be their slam dunk number one workhorse back, because the league's not like that anymore. And we're starting to see that across the board as they are running 1-2 punches. And so, yeah, I think that it is the right time to get rid of a Swift. You probably can get some pretty good offers for him, some pretty good pieces back.
Yeah, 100%. It's just the perfect time. Of course, yeah, the age is still young. He's still 24. We're not saying that, but like the running back market, you mentioned it. And teams looking at running backs, they don't look really for a slam dunk number one most of the time, unless it's the top tier. And Swift had a great year, but he's not in that tier. I want to give him that.
Yeah, as far as my next guy goes here, actually, it's technically two guys here because I didn't want to separate the two. I think that they're sort of in tandem with each other of how I'm looking at this. It's Zamir White and it's Isaiah Spiller. And listen, Zamir White, he is 24 years old. Zach, do you still own Zamir White in our league?
I don't think so. I think I dropped him earlier in the year.
Yeah, it looks like the same team actually has Isaiah Spiller and Zamir White, grabbing him off the waiver wire. One of those rebuilding teams, and now they might be able to cash in and start their rebuild. So hope that team's listening. I'm not going to name any names, but both guys I think fall into the same category. Zamir White, listen, he's 24 years old. I think that this year a lot of people are going into the offseason thinking he is for sure the starting running back because of the way that the season ended with Josh Jacobs not playing, and the way that Zamir White kind of just came onto the scene and looked really, really good. And so they're like, listen, he's going to be the next Josh Jacobs, and he's going to be, for sure a workhorse back there. I don't know that I take that, completely to be true. And so I'm putting him on there. I think that there's a lot of people out there that are going to try to grab him for, late first round pick, early second round pick, those sort of high rates. And we're talking about a guy who potentially could end up being as like a third round value or even lower than that if they go out and they just say, okay, well, we're bringing in Saquon to be our guy. And so now all of a sudden he's the backup again. The same goes out in LA. Listen, I think there's a really good chance that Austin Eckler actually ends up back in LA and they give him the money, just based on the standpoint of I think that they're going to cut one of their receivers, whether it's Mike Williams or it's Keenan Allen. Not sure yet, obviously, who it's going to be. We now obviously know that Mike Williams is going to be coming off of an ACL injury, so more than likely it'll probably end up being him, but the Keenan Allen rumblings are still out there. Listen, I think that Isaiah Spiller is in a spot right now where they projected him to be the future, the successor to Austin Eckler. He didn't really get a spot early on. Towards the end of the year, he started to get a lot of work. And so didn't really see too much. So, which is why I value him obviously lower than a guy like a Zamir White, but he still ends up making this list because I think that there's still going to be a buyer for him. Listen, he got scooped up in our waiver wire in our league by a rebuilder. I think that there's a ton of rebuilders out there that would love to give him up. And, that's one of those pieces where I would say, if you're one of those middle teams trying to get one of the top guys, I think I would use Isaiah Spiller or Zamir White to upgrade off of that. And so, yeah, you're selling high, but really what you're not selling him for, pieces. You're using him as the piece to get a higher valuation. And so it's selling high in that regard where his value is right now higher. So you're using the high to get even higher before his value goes back down low and you can't really get anything for him. as far as trying to upgrade.
Yeah, I agree with you. When it comes to Spiller, I think I mean Jim Harbaugh coming in, we know how much he loves those two running back sets. I mean, it's all he did while he was at Michigan, and then of course now he's got a guy in Herbert, so he's going to be doing a bunch of everything there. So definitely could see a kind of the tandem there with Eckler back there as well, with a guy like Spiller. I think that's definitely an interesting one, and then. Of course, you mentioned Zamir White. Like, it was a great stretch, but who knows if he's going to be the number one guy. I think Vegas could go a ton of different ways. There's a lot of free agent running backs going to be available, like we talked about, Brett. So definitely an interesting one. I think I agree with you definitely on both of them. They're sell highs right now because just the question mark of what's going to happen before free agency. Might as well take advantage of that value that they have right now.
Yeah, I just think that as far as the Zamir White valuation goes, unless you're trying to get like a late first rounder, like I said before, like I'm using him to go out and try to get an even better guy based off of his current value. And you're probably looking at some of those rebuilding teams as targets for trying to offer up Zamir White as part of a package. And same thing with Spiller.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. I'll take us to my next guy, and it's a big name. We have a lot of big names on here.
Yeah.
Mine's Cooper Kupp. I think Cooper Kupp is in the spot right now. Going to be 31 when the season starts. I think the big thing about that is, of course, the age is getting up there, so that leads to maybe a couple more injuries, a couple more questions. I think the biggest thing is I don't think he's the number one anymore in LA, Brett. I think it's clearly Puka Nacua now. And we've kind of seen this when rookie wide receivers come in, they end up just taking over as the number one. We saw it in Dallas, Amari Cooper, CD Lamb. CD's the number one. Amari's out the door. I don't know if Cooper Kupp's getting out the door quickly, but I mean, I think there's going to be a ton of targets towards Puka Nacua, more than there are towards Cooper Kupp. And at 31 years old, he had a good solid stretch towards the end of the season. I think it wasn't the greatest Cooper Kupp numbers that we've seen before from him, but they were solid enough that you can get value for him with that, plus his name. I think just everything in that. I see him as a sell high because Puka Nacua, of course, is going to take over a lot of those targets next year, I think, Brett.
Yeah, I mean, Puka Nacua was the absolute winner, I think, this fantasy season as far as like value of where he was coming into the season from a dynasty standpoint, like third to fourth round rookie picks. We have in our league the option at the end of the draft, you have to cut down your roster. And so he actually was part of the cut down day because we didn't know what his role was going to be heading into the season. Sure enough, I was lucky enough to go out and scoop him up after the week one based on my waiver availability, based on my waiver priority order. And so, yeah, I mean, as far as Cooper Kupp goes, like you just said, like I think we're starting to see the changing of the guard. And there were a lot of games this year. I think it was like 6 or 7 of them where he was outside the top 50. And as far as the wide receiver rankings go, and obviously he was injured to start the year. I think that's another concern that I have. He's 30 years old. Listen, he'll be there. I don't know that he's going anywhere. Obviously, McVay loves him just as a person. And so I don't know that he's going to be going anywhere. He'll be the number 2 guy for sure. And he'll get his boatload of targets. I don't know that that's going to change. I think just he's going to be the second read in this offense. And that started to happen, obviously, down the stretch of the season. We saw it more and more. I just think that by having both of them in the lineup too, that makes them a really scary offense because you don't really know who's going to be the guy to take over. Because listen, you could double Puka Nacua, but then you'll get your Cooper Kupp game, and we saw a couple of those this year. And so I still think the value is high on him, and obviously the name value still graces Cooper Kupp. We obviously saw in redraft he was a first-round pick in pretty much every league. I think that in this coming season, he's still going to be in the first couple rounds. I don't know that that's going to really change either. And so, yeah, you probably still can get a lot for him. I think that the cliff is here though, which is kind of sad because Cooper Kupp has been all reliable for so many teams over the last couple of years. And so, yeah, kind of an end of an era, passing of the guard. But I think that it's time if you're on the Cooper Kupp train to get off.
Yeah, 100%, Brett.
Okay, our last candidate here is actually one that we both had on our list, and so we both agree about it. And I really just think that it comes down to the longevity of his contract, and it's Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, just I think it was almost a year ago, said he's going to finish out this contract with the Dolphins, and then I'm going to call it quits. That contract runs through 2025. And so, yeah, there's a couple more years in this because obviously, he's got 2 years left at least. If you're a contender, you're going to hold for those 2 years, there's no faulting you. If you're on the other side of the spectrum and you're either coming off of this reign and you're trying to almost retool to keep going, like this is a perfect guy to go out and trade a boatload for, just based on the fact that he is that deep threat. He scored so many bombs, and there's a lot of leagues that award 40 plus yard bonuses, like our league has it. And so I think that as far as the value goes, it's super high right now. And you could probably, like I just said, like that's a guy you could go out and get Marvin Harrison Jr. for. One of those top end picks in the draft. Like I think that that's something you can get here for Tyreek Hill.
100%. I think he's near the top. He's going to be near the top of almost every draft. Just, it was unbelievable what he was able to do. And arguably for some people, he's wide receiver 1 heading into this next year. So a lot of questions there. I think the biggest thing you mentioned was the retirement plans. Like, yeah, that's coming soon. That's closer than you think. We're in 2024 now. So I think it's just year after year. Yeah, that's going to be a thing here. The biggest thing for me also is his value is as high as it really can be right now. Like he could end up being wide receiver 1. Like, of course, that comes now, and there's the question of injury or something happens, whatever it is. Don't take that risk. I get it. If you're, like you said, if you're a contender, yeah, you're gonna try and win, and you're gonna go along with your guy and Tyreek Hill. But why even risk anybody else? Why even risk his value right now? It's as high as it can be, really, at the top of the wide receiver boards. I think it's a perfect time for it because soon enough, in a year and a half, 2 years, we're going to be here again, and Tyreek Hill is going to be retired at that point. Like, it's going to come very quick. And yes, he's going to put up numbers. I don't disagree there, but I don't know if their numbers are going to be as good or better than they were this year and last year. They were pretty up there. So I think it's looking really good right now, and it's just a perfect time to grab the ton, and I mean a ton of value for a guy like Tyreek Hill, Brett.
Yeah, and again, it's not about his age because he's 29 and all of that. It more so is the comments that he made about his contract and retiring and riding off into the sunset and all of that sort of stuff. I think that that's where it really comes down to. So yeah, it kind of just depends on where your team is. Like the team that won the championship in our league, he has Tyreek Hill. He's not going to go anywhere. He's going to stay on his team, and I don't blame him. He should keep him for the next 2 years and keep going for it. And so try to get 2 titles, 3 titles out of it on the run. Actually thinking about it, there's a couple guys that are on that list that we just had that are on his team that he probably should not trade and just keep going. As far as Tyreek goes, though, yeah, you're right. He's going to be at the top of the drafts in the redraft standpoint. I think that also carries some weight here. But yeah, I'd rather have a sure thing for the next 5 or 6 or 7 years that could be a potential, game changer for you, like a Marvin Harrison Jr. or one of those younger receivers that exists already in the NFL. And you can pay for Tyreek Hill and then get more than just that for him, obviously.
Yeah, definitely agree with you.
All right, so that's it. As far as our sell high candidates, and make sure you go check out last week's episode as we talked about some of our buy low candidates, guys that you can go out and grab for a lower valuation than they'll probably have come August or September. And now next week we're going to start our free agent previews. This is going to be pretty fun. We're going to go position by position. Next week we're going to start with the quarterbacks and look at some of the guys that are out there on the market and potential fits maybe, and what their value might change based off of where they go. And then we're going to go position by position, which should lead us right into March, right into free agency season. And we're excited to start to get to talking about the draft, because I think that that's something that every fantasy football owner loves, talking about the draft. And obviously now from a dynasty standpoint, you're talking about guys that are, we're trying to place where they go in a mock draft, but you don't really know what team they're going to be on. I think it'll be fun to actually start to figure out some landing spots of where's Caleb Williams playing and et cetera. So definitely looking forward to that. Zach, any last words here?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, draft season really one of the best when it comes to dynasty, and of course free agency. We talked a lot about some of these names this week and last week. Free agency is going to be nuts. So there's going to be a lot of big names out there. Very excited to go through it.
Yeah, and my favorite part is also like when we start to get right before free agency and you start to see some of these bigger names just get cut. Some of the names that are out there right now, like Keenan Allen. We'll see what happens, and then of course you hit a lot of those big trades. Like obviously we saw some trades over the last couple of years. Russell Wilson getting traded out of Seattle. Like I think that sent shockwaves through the entire NFL, and obviously we know how that ended up turning out, where now he's going to be looking for another team. But I'm sure we'll see a couple of those bigger trades in the next couple of weeks. So excited to see that. And we're going to start next week with some quarterbacks. And so, and then obviously we got the Super Bowl coming up as well. And so that'll be exciting. Everybody, please subscribe to us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Night is darkest before the dawn, and we shall rise it again. For Zach Nalman, I'm Brett Nalman, signing off here on the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. We will catch you guys next week, start of our free agency previews.